Hi, everyone. Say hello. Say welcome to Kiev. Fantastic. All right. I'm increasing my energy level after lots of flying and lots of traveling. Okay. So you guys know me. I'm Gordon Einstein. I'm a lawyer. I don't really have to beat it to death, I think. Let's see where I point. We have an introduction, and it's free. It's included. All right. Oh, my God. Now, if I walk around, I'll say this right to the video. Is that going to mess you up, or is that OK? That's all right? OK, so why even do this class? Well, just real quick, I'm a U.S. attorney. I specialize in blockchain and crypto law. I have the honor of being the chief legal officer of Distributed Lab. And Pavel right there, who's about, I think, to collapse from exhaustion, just like me. I do lots of securities, tax, banking, and international legal work. As you probably already noticed, I speak in fast, technical, nerdy English. OK? I know you noticed that. So if something's not clear, okay, or if you need me to restate something or slow down, raise your hand and go, Gordon, slow down. Okay, it's okay to do that. This will be interactive. I like questions. I like being challenged. You know, you're all smart. You're all into this topic. If I don't know something, I'll tell you, and I'll go figure it out and report back. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. So I think we can have a good dialogue. Now, I think this whole generation operates on Instagram. So who's familiar with the term FUD? Good. There you go. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Okay, FUD is what Microsoft tried to do about Linux. You know, it's just like, you can't use that. It's open source. Okay, and the counterpart to FUD is FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. Okay, so when it comes to raising capital, I want everyone to get over their FUD so that they don't have FOMO. All right? And I've also noticed that a lot of attorneys, when they do presentations or they do education, they're more about creating FUD and getting people nervous and scared than they are about providing solutions that people can work with. And I like to provide solutions and knowledge because I strongly believe in the blockchain and crypto movements or revolutions, whatever you want to call it, and what it can do for humanity and the world. So that's what I'm about. OK, so getting to know you. I mean, I'm in Kiev. I assume everyone's a nerd and into technology. Is anyone not a nerd and not into technology? Would you even raise your hand otherwise? OK, cool. Attorneys. I think I see one. Don't be shy. You can. It's OK. We can be in the same room. It won't explode. Here. Yeah. Attorney. Cool. Any other attorneys? Oh, wow. This is fantastic. OK, great. Who's currently invested in crypto? Okay, well, who's feeling that they're taking substantial losses recently? What? Who is feeling that they've been taking substantial losses recently? Who's looking for a new line of work? Okay, just kidding. Who has an active blockchain project? Good. All right, fantastic. And who has conducted, is conducting, or wants to conduct an ICO, an initial coin offering? All right. You see, you know, it used to be like, everyone's like, yeah, I got that. Now I think people are a little hesitant to acknowledge that in public. All right. Who's concerned, not scared, but concerned about U.S. securities law? Good. OK, you should be raising your hand about that one, just in general. OK, that doesn't mean have fear, but just be aware. All right. Now, just real quick, the agency in the United States that is in charge of administering U.S. Securities Regulation is the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission. Securities and Exchange Commission, OK? I go around the world. Some people call it SEC outside the United States. It's just pronounced SEC. Okay, every government agency in the U.S. is pronounced by the letters of the initials are pronounced as the letters. Okay, so there's FBI, CIA, SEC. You know, FSB. No, that's not us. So just if you go in the U.S. and you want people to understand what you mean, say SEC. And let me just take a poll. Who in the room thinks that the SEC has the legal power to ban ICOs? OK. You may be right. Who thinks that they don't have that power? Who's not going to raise their hand no matter what I do, even if I ask you to raise your hand? OK. We'll see how this develops. All right. Now, this is a nifty graphic that I banged out. You know, Pavel was saying, you know, we were just on a crypto cruise. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, while people walking by me drunk and speaking totally in Russian, I was there just working on graphics. So, see the sacrifices that I make. Anyway, so let's take a big step back before we get into securities law. One fundamental question is, why raise capital in the first place? Like, what are we doing? What's the idea behind a security? What's the idea behind capital? Well, in traditional economics, you have what are called inputs of production. Okay, the things that go into a project or a business or a venture that are sort of the ingredients that make that venture produce value that's beyond what you initially put in. It's called a surplus value. So traditional inputs were labor, land, capital, a few other things. There's sort of the 21st century model of this, which I've modified the standard inputs of production. What turns the ingredients into a pie? Well, you need entrepreneurship. You need someone with an idea. You need someone with vision, and someone with management or organizational skills. That can be a group of people, but things don't just happen. Someone has to have that sort of intellectual spark. Well, that's not enough. Some work actually needs to get done. Now, traditionally, that was human beings using muscle power, and then we had machinery. But one way or another, it's some form of labor or automation or processes or work. That's a productive input. Then most businesses need assets in order to produce something. Okay? In the old days, it would be a factory, it would be machinery, a horse, something like that. These days, it might simply be intellectual property or computer code. Right? So here's your traditional or a modified version of your traditional inputs of production that when you combine it with some sort of enterprise opportunity, which is risky, if you do things the right way, out pop services, goods, now in the modern era, intellectual property, technology, and potentially tokens. Well, you have this nice flow from left to right where these inputs get put into this enterprise opportunity and you come out with these outputs. But of course, the animating spirit or the essential component of 99% of businesses and startups is you need capital. You need wealth. You need money. Capital comes in many different forms. But you need that sort of ubiquitous power that we call capital that lets you hire whatever labor, inputs, organization you don't have available from the founders. Right? So capital is usually money, but it doesn't need to be money all the time. But capital is an amazing thing because a lot of these things are static. Like if you perform work, you don't get more work as a result. But the interesting thing about capital is you can put it into a process and then end up with more capital than you started with. Okay, it's kind of unique on the planet that way. So where does capital come from? Where does money come from that allows a enterprise to take a chance, to engage risk and hopefully grow? Well, there's two broad traditional areas or sources of capital. There's bank loans. Basically a bank sees how you're going to perform or how you might perform, extends a loan to you, wants the repayment of that principal plus interest. It's very rare for startups to get bank loans. I haven't really seen too many blockchain startups, especially do bank loans. The other source of capital that gets things moving is, of course, investment. Investment from individuals, investment from funds. One way or another, people putting in their money or their capital into the enterprise and taking risk alongside with the enterprise. It's not just a loan, it's their sort of co-venturers. And when you add capital, people aren't doing charity, they want something back in return. They either want a share of the profits, which is the traditional model, or they somehow want a stake in the appreciation of the assets that the entity is producing. Okay? Now, this brand new exciting model, I'm going to skew this presentation obviously for blockchain and for crypto and not just kind of keep it purely on standard or historical securities. We have a really interesting new model now where the people who invest their capital into a blockchain startup aren't necessarily doing it because they want a share of the profits of that entity. They're doing it because they want the assets that that entity is building a platform for to appreciate in value, tokens. It's a new thing. It never used to be the case that people would invest in a business, get the goods from that business, and kind of hold on to them hoping that they would appreciate in value. Okay, so there's all these long technical definitions of securities, and we're going to get into them. All right, but here's sort of the Gordon relatively short version. Okay, what the heck is a security? I mean, what is this thing? I mean, we just saw a model of why we need capital and how that produces results. I'm going to read this, but I'm going to do it with emphasis and with some pauses to sort of explain where I'm going with this. You know, a security is the legal interest which an investor receives in exchange for contributing capital. And capital can be either money or some other thing of value. Labor can represent capital. Intellectual property that's worth something can represent capital. But generally, it's money, but not always. So it's the legal interest which an investor receives in exchange for contributing capital, whether it's money or something else, to an enterprise, and we'll get into what that word means, with the expectation or hope, perhaps, of realizing a profit or other economic benefit resulting from the enterprise's success. But where such outcome is not guaranteed and the investment capital is at risk of being reduced or lost. Now, let's kind of dissect this a little bit. If I go into some store, if I go to some clock manufacturing plant and I buy a clock, okay, I'm not investing in the company. If the company then goes bankrupt, my clock still works, all right? I'm not taking a risk along with this enterprise and hoping that the clock company makes more money so my clock becomes more valuable. That's just a normal good or a normal consumer item. What makes a security is that I'm putting in my capital into an enterprise, not for good or service back, but in the hopes that I can share in the economic success of that enterprise, and then make profit that's beyond what the value of the good is that I'm receiving. But of course, that exposes me to risk because when I buy a service, when I buy a good, I own it, it's mine. And if the company that stands behind it disappears, I'm not dead. But if I invest in a company and it goes bankrupt, I can lose my entire investment. You're sort of a co-venturer. So the short version of the short version is that a security is fundamentally an investment contract. Okay, what's a contract? It's a legally enforceable agreement between parties where you have different things being provided, different things that are obligations, and it's reciprocal. All right, so is that reasonably clear? I'm seeing nods, great. Okay, so here's the first sidebar. When you speak to your typical retail investor, your small investor, when they think of securities, what they generally associate with this is stock or shares in a company. Okay? In other words, they think of equity, right? Stock or shares in a company are what most people think of when they think of a security. And the terms share and stock are mostly synonymous, right? Now, what is equity? What does that actually mean in real life? Well, equity is a legally recognized ownership position, and it's primarily based on national or state corporate or company law. Every country I think every country on the planet has its own version of a Corporations Act or a Company Act. And when people own part of a company and become shareholders, that's something that lives under company or corporate law, whether it's in Ukraine or Malta or in the different states of the United States. Each one has its own version of this is what you do to create a company, or this is what you do to create a corporation. A equity position in a company is not so much based on contract law. The company doesn't owe you something. There's not two parties to an agreement so much. It's more a corporate or company law function. So it's sort of interesting that way. Now, from a financial perspective, and this is a term you see all the time, equity fundamentally represents the residual claims on an enterprise's assets. Okay, what the heck does that mean? Well, if you've seen a traditional accounting balance sheet, you have assets, you have liabilities, you have owner's equity. And the left side, the assets, should theoretically balance out the right side, the liabilities and the owner's equity. Well, there's what's called the accounting equation, where that's actually true. Assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Right? When there's claims on the assets of the company, certain people come first, certain people come later. The creditors of the company, i.e. the people who lent that company money, come first. Only once all their assets have been exhausted do the equity owners have any claim on what's left, the residual. Okay, so there's a fundamental distinction between debt and equity. So when you think about equity, when you think about shares, and when you think about stock, think about that these are the claims or the residual claims on the enterprise's assets. Now, equity also has an interesting function. It's associated with the control and governance of an enterprise. Okay, in almost every country on the planet, if you own shares of stock in a company, you generally have the right to elect or appoint the directors of a company. The directors of the company appoint the officers, and they run the business. This is not the case with debt. If you loan money to a company, you generally do not have the right to appoint the directors and the officers. Now, of course, there is such a thing as non-voting stock, but I'm talking about the default rules. Equity is also associated with dividends, meaning that there may be a periodic payment on a pro rata basis of the profits of the company to the shareholders of the company. Someone who lends money to the company, someone who's a creditor, doesn't have a right to profits. They just have a right to their money back and interest, but it doesn't depend on their bringing profits so long as the company's not bankrupt. So if you think about equity, it's part of what's called the enterprise's capital structure. And again, it exists on the enterprise's balance sheet under owner's equity. All right. Now, sort of the flip side of equity is debt. And there's different words that people use for debt. There's notes, there's bonds, there's debentures. They're all forms of debt. Now, these terms, unlike, say, stock and shares, which sort of mean the same thing, these are mostly synonymous, but they're not entirely synonymous. And also, usage varies by country. And let me make one note, because I see people taking pictures of the slides, and I appreciate it. I am more than happy to email everyone the PowerPoint deck. This is not some trade secret. I'm just here to educate everyone and have conversations. So it's not, I mean, for a small fee, of course. No, I'll share. All right. Well, but yeah, just not Ether, because I don't know what's going on with Ether. All right, it's driving me crazy. All right, so you're welcome to take pictures, but I will share the deck. I'm happy to. All right, so notes, bonds, debentures, these are all items of debt. They're most of the time securities, but they're not always securities. And just, at least in the United States, a commercial bank loan, even if it's based on a note, which is one of the listed items, is typically not treated like a security. If you go to some bank and you borrow $1 million to go build a manufacturing plant, that's not treated as a sale of a security. Now, unlike with equity, the legal basis of enforceable debt is contract law. It's not based on company or corporate law. It is a contract between two parties. And the contract is generally that there's going to be agreed upon payments of interest, and then the principal, i.e. the loan amount, is going to get returned at a certain point of time. And if you compare who has the right to the assets, if equity owners have what's called residual claims, then debt owners, creditors, have what's called primary claims. Okay, they need to be paid first before equity owners get paid anything. And yes, debt lives under the enterprise's capital structure, and it's usually under the liability section. So again, assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Okay, now why did I go off on that riff? You know, this is kind of dry stuff. Well, in the exciting token blockchain world, we've moved beyond traditional debt, and we've moved beyond traditional equity. We now have tokens. You know, where do tokens live on the balance sheet? Anyone? Well, your silence is right, because they don't live on the balance sheet. They're almost like an off-balance sheet asset. Okay, when people sell tokens, there's no claim on the underlying, there's usually no claim on the underlying assets of either the business or the platform. Right? There's maybe a contractual sort of claim that you're going to be able to access the platform, and there's some sort of software license or use right. But if the tokens don't work, it's not like the token holders can generally turn around and say, you know, give me the property or the assets of the business, and they can't generally turn around and say, well, wait a second, I want to elect directors. Okay, tokens are a whole new kind of thing. They go beyond the typical classes of equity and debt. And this is important because we've seen recently this explosion of new kinds of securities, things that don't fit into the traditional model. And going around the world and speaking to people about the subject, you know, there's a constant struggle of people wondering whether or not the token they're issuing is a security or not, because it doesn't fit the normal model. So let's explore this a little bit. Who's heard of the term a SAFT? I think most of this room is probably, I think people are being shy. Okay, so a SAFT is a simple agreement for future tokens, SAFT. It's based on something called a simple agreement for future equity. Now, imagine, here's the typical scenario. Imagine you have a blockchain startup that has a great idea, but they have not yet built their platform. And they need money, they need capital. They need capital to make it happen. Well, they don't want to sell equity, they don't want to sell debt. What do? Oops. Well, in this brave new world of tokens and blockchain, they can sell their tokens that don't even work yet, take the money that they raised, the capital, use it to build the platform, and then the tokens can actually do something. That's kind of exciting. This gets rid of venture capitalists. This gets rid of the bank. This is sort of capitalism on steroids. Now, that sounds awesome. And actually, I think it is awesome. But that's going into the area of securities, even if it doesn't have an equity characteristic and even if it doesn't have a debt characteristic. Now, why? Because the consensus around the world right now is that when you sell tokens that aren't functional, and you're taking the money that results from that in order to build a platform that will make those tokens functional, that those tokens, at least for the period until the platform is built, are securities. Okay, now why? Okay, why aren't they just pre-functional tokens? Well, the idea is, what's really going on here? What's really going on is that people who buy those tokens, two things are going on. They're not buying a toaster or a clock that they can use right away. They're buying a toaster or a clock maybe that will work someday or maybe won't. What is going to control whether or not the toaster or that clock works? Well, it's whether or not the platform works, whether or not the business underlying that platform survives and thrives. In other words, when you buy those pre-functional tokens, you're taking on enterprise risk, right? You're almost like a co-owner of that company praying that they survive so that your toaster finally starts working, right? And also, it's a nice theory that people buy these tokens because they want to support this platform and they really want to use it once the tokens become functional. But the reality, which is, I don't like it personally, but it is the reality, is that when people buy these tokens early, before they're functional, yes, they may be excited about the project. Yes, they may want it to work, but they really want those tokens to go up in value so they can resell them on exchange and make a ton of money and then put them into the next token sale. Okay? Does anyone disagree with that idea? I mean, I think I know one guy. No, I don't know anyone who's not buying these pre-functional tokens except to make a profit. Okay, so, well, that's troubling because these tokens that would ultimately not be securities, they would just be useful things, are securities for a while, and they're regulated like securities. What the heck do you do? Well, there's now this idea called a SAFT, a Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. The idea is that you treat this thing like it is. You treat it like it's a risky investment. It's a security. And you find some select investors and you say, okay, I will give you the tokens later, but for now, give me your money. Okay, I'll give you a piece of paper. That piece of paper says that I'm going to take your money, I'm going to use it to build the platform, and then once the platform is ready, I'm going to convert that piece of paper into tokens. And at the time that I convert those tokens, they won't be securities because the platform will be functional. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. Rather than giving these securities out before they're functional, in other words, rather than giving these tokens out while they're securities, you instead give these pieces of paper, okay, that have restrictions on them. They're not transferable. Okay, they're to certain selected investors. They're not to the whole world. Okay, you take the money that you receive, the Bitcoin or Ethereum or dollars or euros, whatever, that you receive in exchange for those things, those SAFs. You use that to build the platform. Then, once the platform is built, and the tokens would not be securities if issued, then you convert those SAFs into tokens, right? That's how the vast majority of blockchain-based startups are making their money. And what we're seeing, I think Pavel's observed this also, is that the traditional public ICO is declining, but what's going on is all these blockchain projects are raising money privately through selling SAFs, okay? And I personally recently been involved in deals where they're raising millions of dollars by selling SAFs privately. All right? So let's keep going here. Now, here's sort of a visualization of this. You have investors. They're putting in capital. They're putting into something that has enterprise risk and enterprise opportunity. Right? If they want to share in the profits of the business, then they get sort of an equity or shares type position, and that routes back to the investors. If they want to make money in this new way, they want to make money from the appreciation of the tokens once the platform begins to work, they're getting tokens, or better yet, SAFs, and those are going back to the investors. In either case, these, at least in the beginning, are securities and need to be treated as such, right? Both the shares, of course, that's a traditional security, but also tokens that are pre-functional and in the form of SAFs, those are securities. Those are being given to the investors so that this enterprise can take the risks to take advantage of the opportunity. And what I'm seeing out there in the field is that investors, they don't want just equity. They don't just want tokens. They want both. Okay? They're buying interest in the company plus warrants, plus tokens, plus SAFs. So they can get profits one way or another. Okay. So you can raise a lot of money by issuing securities. And you can do it in a way that is reasonably fast. You don't have to manufacture something. You actually just create something. You're not producing a good. You're not providing a service. You're just creating something. It sounds great. So why doesn't everyone do it all the time? Well, because money is involved, because these things are complex, because people get greedy and feel fear, security sales and security transactions all around the world are highly regulated. And because there's so many fraudsters out there, because there's so many bad people out there, there's regulatory agencies that are primed to look for bad doing, for mistakes or problems, and come down hard on people that are manipulating the system. So security sales are very highly regulated everywhere, especially in developed economies, because that's where the money is. And in the United States, where I practice, it's regular securities regulation looks friendly, I guess, compared to us, because the SEC has a reputation for being extremely aggressive and for protecting US investors all over the world. So how do you maneuver through the system? And why do you even bother with the United States? Well, just keep in mind, if you're a blockchain startup and you're trying to raise capital for your startup, including with an ICO, the two largest economies on the planet right now are the United States and China. China may be pulling ahead on some measures, but they're kind of neck and neck right now. Right now, ICOs are legal in the United States. They're not legal in China. You're depriving yourself of a fantastic source of capital if you ignore the United States and get kind of scared away by its security regulation regime. Also, US investors want to invest in blockchain projects, okay? And they do invest. There's millions and millions of dollars from US individuals and funds flowing into blockchain projects. They're eager to invest, and they do it. It's worth considering also that token sales, ICOs, are marketing events. They're PR events. They're not just ways of raising capital. If you are competing against someone and they're out there raising money in the US and getting everyone to know about their token because they're doing an ICO or a private sale, and you're not doing that, they'll beat you, even if you have a better product. And the final thing, the punchline, is that it's true that the default rules in the United States when it comes to securities regulation are aggressive and kind of harsh, but there are a ton of exceptions, or what we call exemptions, from those rules. And if you take proper advantage of those exceptions or exemptions, I wouldn't say things are easy, but things are much easier than the default rules, and I'll show you how to take advantage of them. By the time you walk out of here, you'll know how to raise money privately in the United States, bypass the SEC, from unlimited investors, unlimited funds. Who's excited about it? Who's happy to hear that? Who wants money? Who wants to have money and not go to jail? You want to go to jail? Okay, well, that's very adventurous. I'm up for new experiences. I think I'll pass on that one. Okay, so in order to understand the system, it's good to understand how it developed. And the US has a very interesting history when it comes to securities regulation. And this history has affected the rest of the world because most other countries base their securities law to a certain extent off of US law. Okay, just because the US sort of hit it first. So one big step back, and here's sort of like a civics class on the United States. The fundamental law in the United States, unlike some other countries, is based on its written constitution. Right? England, for example, doesn't have a written constitution, but the United States and most other countries do have a written constitution. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just dive right into it. Hold on, let me just go here. So the key to understanding any law in the United States, and especially U.S. securities regulation, is understanding the U.S. Constitution. Keep in mind that before there was the United States, there were just states. There was the state of Pennsylvania, state of Virginia, state of Massachusetts. Those were, in essence, independent countries. Okay? And they agreed, almost EU style, to come together and form the United States. If you look at the original Articles of Confederation, the first document that governed North America, it had United States, and the U in United was lowercase. It was just states that happened to be united. The actual term United States was in the second document, right? So you had all these countries, you had all these states in North America that decided to at first form a confederation and then form a full federation. In other words, to pull together more tightly. But that creates a unique system in the US that not every other country has, where you have different layers of control. You have different layers of sovereignty. You have a federal government, that's sort of the national government, and then we have 50 states with their own unique laws. Talk about painful. So if you want to sell toothbrushes in the United States, you have to deal with US federal law and the law of 50 states. Oh my gosh, kill me. All right. Now, so the US Constitution sort of governs the balance between the states and the federal government, okay? And within the federal government, you have the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. Legislative branch is like Congress or Parliament. Judicial is the courts. Executive is the president. So all these branches, all these different layers share power and balance each other off. And when things get rough, the United States Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of who gets to do what. Right? So this structure informs all of US securities law. You have the federal layer, you have the state layer. Within the federal layer, you have three branches of the government: Congress, the courts, the president, and the different agencies, and they all battle each other and they all cooperate. Okay, so why does this matter? What happened? Well, if you look at the United States prior to 1911, prior to 100 years ago, there was no federal, there was no national law regarding securities. None. It was a matter of state law. And the states barely even regulated securities at all. Until in 1911, Kansas, where Dorothy lives, Kansas, not New York, but Kansas, came up with the first law regulating securities. Okay, why in God's name would Kansas, where Dorothy lives, and there's like tornadoes and the straw man, why would Kansas come up with securities law? Why not New York? Well, what was happening was all the investment bankers and all the stockbrokers and all the dealers in New York were taking advantage of the people in Kansas and selling them stock that was worthless. Right? Well, of course, New York's not going to stop that. New York thinks that's great. Forget Kansas. We'll take all their money. Right? But Kansas said, okay, stop. We don't want that New York money. That New York crazy guy is taking all our money. So they put in place the first instance of securities regulation in the United States. And it's called the first blue sky law. Okay, now why is it called the blue sky law? Right? The idea was, and there's some quote where these New York bankers were coming in there and selling stocks in companies that had no more existence than the blue sky above your head. In other words, like these phantom companies that didn't actually exist. So it stopped the issue in Kansas, sort of, but there's 50 states. So each state either had no regulation, some regulation, tough regulation, but there's no consistency. And so the people who were abusing the system could work in this jurisdiction, work in that jurisdiction, sort of operate from one where they were safe, sell into another one. It kind of sounds like token sales. Sound familiar? Except that instead of all these different states, you have all these different countries, where each one with different rules, no consistency, and you can kind of jurisdiction shop and choose where you can get away with stuff. There's lots of fraud, there's lots of pumping and dumping, there's lots of insider trading, and there was an interesting sort of conflict in philosophy about how you would regulate securities. Some states that regulated securities said, we're not in a position to decide whether or not an investment is good, we're just in a position to make the issuer, make the company selling the investments, give all the information about that investment to the potential buyers, and then they can make up their own minds about whether or not it makes sense. Okay, that's called disclosure. Right? If I am the government and I don't trust myself to decide whether or not an investment is good, I can just make sure that you, the potential investor, has enough information so that you can make up your own mind. Right? But that's not the way it has to be. Some states have what was called a merit requirement. In other words, they would look at an investment and go, this looks like a good investment. I think widows and orphans should invest in this. And they say, okay, we approve of this investment because you'll probably make money. Now, who thinks that the government is qualified to decide what kind of investment will make money? Does anyone? Okay. Yeah, I mean, the government is not known for picking investment winners, all right? So the minority position was the sort of merit evaluation. The majority position was this disclosure evaluation. What ultimately ended up happening, and I'll get to this, is that the federal law, once it was finally put into place, was based on disclosure, not on merit. In other words, the law is that you have to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. But once you have the truth, it's up to you to decide whether you want to invest or not, and that's your problem. You make money, great. You lose money, great. We're not here to tell you whether or not it's a good idea. And that, by the way, is generally the rule all over the world. Oops, okay, let's go here. So, all right, so 1911. Now, fraud did not end in 1911, but why was there not a federal securities law? You know, the nation was coming together. People were selling across borders. Well, it took a long time, but on October 24th, 1929, Wall Street crashed. The stock market in the United States crashed, and this is the official beginning of the Great Depression. What most people don't realize is this was right after the London Stock Exchange crashed. So London crashed, people got nervous, New York crashed, right? All these people that had borrowed money to buy stock on margin had their positions closed out, so all these people lost their money. The Great Depression starts, we start having tariffs being raised, so there's trade wars. A lot of people don't know this also, but Germany after World War I, under the Treaty of Versailles, had to pay huge reparations to Britain and especially to France. They couldn't afford it. They had a crippled economy. So Germany, after World War I, was borrowing money from the United States to pay reparations back to France and Britain on the basis of World War I. Well, when the Great Depression hit, the US had no more money to lend. So Germany stopped paying reparations. Okay, and this led right through a series of different events to the Nazis coming to power. The Weimar Republic fell. The Nazis came into power. You had World War II, and things became a big, big, big mess. You can really, truly draw a straight line from lack of securities regulation in the United States to World War II. Okay, it's like bang, bang, bang. You can see when you look in the history, you can see the dominoes fall one after the other. So securities regulation is important. So the Great Depression started. Millions of people were out of work. Everyone blamed Wall Street and the investment bankers for what was happening. So finally, there was enough political pressure on a federal level for there to be a federal investigation and then laws put into place, finally. And think about this. This is 22 years or 23 years later after Kansas put in the first law. So the U.S. has something called the Pecora Commission that did this wide-ranging investigation of security sales in the United States, and they found all kinds of shady activities, insider trading, fraud, watered stocks, everything. The public got pissed. And Franklin Roosevelt, the president at the time, put in a series of laws under something called the New Deal. The New Deal affected almost every aspect of life in America, but it went very hard after the securities industry because everyone blamed the Great Depression on all the speculation and abuse in stock sales. So they passed some key pieces of legislation. All right. If you're into securities law at all, you should tattoo this on your brain. Okay, there's 5 laws that form the basis of U.S. securities regulation. These are the 5. Okay? And there's 2 core laws within that 5 that really are the foundation of the foundation. There's the Securities Act of 1933, which is referred to as either the Securities Act or the Act. And then there's the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Right? These 2 laws together, they work in tandem, are the basis of U.S. securities law. And then after that, but not long after that, you had the Trust Indenture Act that governed the sale of bonds. You had the Investment Company Act, which dealt with basically mutual funds. And you had the Investment Advisors Act, which dealt with people who received money for giving investment advice. Now, there's something kind of strange here, which is, again, there's 2 core laws that form the basis of U.S. securities regulation. Almost every other country on the planet has 1 core law. So why does the U.S. have 2? Any guesses? Say again? No, that was the Civil War. No. The answer is the U.S. was a little busy right then because we had the Great Depression and World War II was coming, and the Congress didn't know what the heck they were doing. And they tried to do one integrated scheme of legislation at the beginning, and they just couldn't do it. So they did the 33 Act, and I'll explain what it does. And then they did the 34 Act. They kind of broke into two parts. Later on, actually in the 70s, because this is freaking confusing, and everyone kind of goes to this and goes, what the hell's going on? In the 70s, the American Legal Institute tried to create something called the U.S. Federal Securities Code, which would have made sense out of this whole thing. It actually had some really good ideas in it, and it never even got introduced to Congress. Because what happens is, when you put something big in place, even when it's wrong, there's all these interests that form around it to keep it in place, and everyone kind of gets used to it one way or another. So we have two core laws, while every other country has one core law. Give me one second. California calling. They can wait. Okay, so. All right. Just here's the New Deal legislation in a little bit more detail. The Securities Act, and I'll cover this more later, covers the initial sale of securities by the issuer. In other words, if I'm a company and I'm raising investment capital, if I'm the one who wants your money so I can do my project, okay, I'm the issuer. That's covered underneath the Securities Act, and it also covers securities fraud. There's another law called Glass-Steagall that got repealed. It separated commercial banking from investment banking, right? That got repealed in 1999. You can pretty much draw a straight line between that and the Great Recession of 2008. And there's the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. So if the Securities Act covers that first sale from a company that's looking to raise money, the Exchange Act covers everything else that happens later. What happens on exchanges, brokers and dealers, right? Market manipulation, all that fun stuff. That's the Securities Exchange Act. We're going to cover that tomorrow. And I already mentioned the final three. Now, beyond those five, there's some important post-New Deal legislation. There's Sarbanes-Oxley. There's Dodd-Frank. There's the Jobs Act, which redid Regulation A+, which we'll talk about. Again, I'll provide everyone with the deck, but you're welcome to take shots. Okay, so let's, and it's worth noting that other things happen beyond securities regulation, and not everything is a security. Okay, there's this feeling that everyone has of, everything's a security, everything's not a security. There's other classes of things out there. For example, around the time that the 33 Act got passed, you also had the Commodity Exchange Act. Okay, some things, oil, gas, pork bellies, those are commodities. Financial derivatives, in other words, things that derive their value from the value of another asset, those are treated in a commodity-like fashion, right? And there's a lesser-known sister of the SEC called the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or the CFTC, that manages commodities or administers the laws of commodities, just like the SEC administers the law on securities. So it's kind of interesting because the SEC and the CFTC sometimes fight things out. And you can make a good argument that a lot of cryptocurrencies and many tokens are really more like commodities than they are like securities. Okay, now let's talk about the SEC in a little bit more detail. The SEC is the agency that's charged with administering the securities regulation laws of the United States. It was created in the Securities Exchange Act, in other words, in 1934, not in 1933. So think about it, the very first law that the US came up with to regulate sales of securities did not create the agency that would, in fact, enforce those laws. Okay? The Federal Trade Commission, by default, was in charge of enforcing the 33 Act, but the FTC couldn't even begin to handle it because securities is so complex. So finally, the next year, when Congress made the Securities Exchange Act, they created the SEC, and the SEC took over administration of securities law. Now, in the United States, your main organs of government are departments. I think that the equivalent here is a ministry. Okay? We have the Department of the Interior. I think everyone else has the Ministry of the Interior. Right? The SEC is interesting. It's what's known as an independent agency. It's not part of a department. It stands alone. It's independent. Okay? And it's a commission. Okay? A commission is a governance structure that's almost like a board or a committee. It has a certain number of appointed people, not elected. Okay? In the case of the SEC, it's 5 appointed commissioners. 3 are appointed by the majority party in Congress. 2 are by the minority. And they each serve a 5-year term. Okay, 5 commissioners, 5-year terms. Each year, one commissioner runs out of that person's term and gets replaced, right? And then there's a chairman of the commission, right? So this agency stands alone and is very independent. And now, that's kind of neat. Now, where does it get its power from? Well, unlike a lot of other departments and less independent agencies, I mean, what does the word independent actually mean there? What it means is the US Congress, which is filled with basically old people who don't understand complex things and are kind of busy, couldn't even begin to make good regulation or rules about securities. It's just way too complex. So they made some general rules, which they mostly screwed up, the 33 Act and the 34 Act, but they did something smart in there, which is they said, okay, this is way too complicated for us. Like, we need like 10 days of Adderall to handle this stuff. We're gonna delegate authority to the SEC, and we're gonna tell the SEC, look, we're giving you lawmaking power on our behalf. Here's the general outlines of what you need to do, but you guys decide for us. If you screw up, we'll kind of back you off, but generally just please do a good job. So the US Congress tells the SEC, look, you can make rules, you can make regulations which have the full force of US federal law. So the SEC is like a little miniature Congress. Right? Now, it does have some limits on its power. It has to act within the scope and conditions of its delegated authority. Okay? The SEC does not have the ability to declare war. It can't raise taxes. It can't expand the Supreme Court. It can only do what the statute says it can do. But so long as it stays within that scope, it's allowed to act. Right? And of course, it has to act in a constitutional manner, just like every other part of the US government. And we're going to get to the Howey case in a few minutes. And the Howey case is a good reminder that the SEC may not go beyond its statutory mandate. Okay? It may not act in an unconstitutional manner. Okay? At the end of the day, it's just like any other part of the US government. It has to follow the law. Okay? So federal courts can and do overrule the SEC. Now, Section 2, actually, let me point one thing out here. All right, I don't know if it's the same here, but this little guy here means section. Okay, so if you ever want to write, they told me this in law school, if you ever want to write that, and write, it's 2 S's, if you're struggling to write the section sign. So the 33 Act is a gold mine of understanding securities law, right? And we'll go into the different sections of it. But there's something really interesting that I want to point out before we dive into there. Section 2B says, and it's worth reading, okay, whenever pursuant to this title, the commission, in other words, the SEC, is engaged in rulemaking, and it is required to consider or determine whether, and it is required to consider or determine whether an action is necessary, blah, blah, blah. The commission shall also consider, in addition to protection of investors, whether the action will promote efficiency, competition, and capital formation. In other words, it's not just here to protect investors. Congress is telling it, don't just be some restrictive, stupid agency that interferes with getting things done. You need to consider whether or not what you're doing will promote efficiency, competition, and capital formation. Okay, now that section, this, was put in by Congress in 1996. Okay, why would they do that? I mean, I'll say it right here on video. It's because the SEC was acting like a bunch of jerks. They were coming up with rules and restrictions that were way too conservative and way too restrictive. They were interfering with the United States, our ability to compete. So the Congress said, okay, it's nice that you're protecting investors, but you need to think about what you're doing. You need to foster efficiency, competition, and capital formation. Now, what effect do you think that this had? Anyone? Absolutely none. Oh, well, they tried. Also, I want to point out something, because this is sort of a legal English thing. They're saying the SEC shall also consider. Well, there's shall consider and there's may consider. Okay, in English, when you say something or an agency shall do something, it means you don't have a choice. You are going to do it. Okay, you may decide how you're going to do it, but you're going to do it. Okay, if you're telling a kid you shall go to bed at 10 p.m., okay, it's not like please, please, please. You know, it's like you shall, as opposed to you may. It's your choice. Would you like to go to bed at 10? No, you want to drink vodka. I know. Okay. So the Congress told SEC you shall take these things into consideration. Whether they're actually doing it, I don't know. Now, here's the question. When ICOs were going hot and heavy in the United States, the SEC started making all this noise like, we're scared for investors. This is bad. This is terrible. But I think they were having a problem showing that most of these ICOs were fraudulent. And in fact, they may have been legitimate. So what the SEC did is they sent out all these subpoenas, all these requests for information, all these requests for documents. And people got freaked out because there's nothing that ruins your day like getting a letter from the SEC saying, hi, please, here's our 20-page document request, starting with your mother's, history back when she was 12. You're like, okay. Scary. Now, were they looking for wrongdoing? Were they fishing for information? I personally think that they were doing this to chill the market and scare people. Okay? They wanted people to sort of back off this way of raising money. Well, if that's true, I wonder if they were really taking into account efficiency, competition, and capital formation. Okay, I don't think so. I could be wrong. Okay, now we're going to dive into the 33 Act. And actually, I'm going to take the pulse of the room. Are we doing okay? Happy? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Anyone just really upset? No. Okay, cool. Okay, so everyone say hello to the Securities Act. Hello. Okay, people did it. Wow, I like this energy. Okay, there's a little preamble, and then there's something. Now, again, notice it's divided into sections, and notice what the section sign looks like. All right. What is the Securities Act? It's to provide the full and fair disclosure of the character of securities sold in interstate and foreign commerce. Notice it's not saying to provide a merit evaluation or provide advice about whether or not these securities are good. It's just disclosure, okay? And also to prevent frauds in the sale of those securities, right? Those are the two core purposes of the Securities Act, to provide for full and fair disclosure and to prevent fraud, right? So let's go here. Let's go in a little bit more detail about what the Securities Act covers. And let's do some terminology. Remember, we have an initial issuer of securities selling that money to investors. Okay. That enterprise, whether it's a blockchain platform or some mom and pop hardware store down the street, the thing that's selling or offering for sale its own securities, in order to raise capital, the term is an issuer. Okay? If you're reading through the law and you want to understand what the heck is going on, look for the word issuer. That means that it's a company or platform that's doing that very first sale, not any sale that happens later. Okay, that's an issuer. When the issuer does that very first sale, there's a specific term. It's a distribution of securities. Okay, you can say it's issuing, that's a little bit vague. It's a distribution of securities. Okay, so issuers distribute their securities. Now, they can either do it directly, like I can sell you a security, but if I'm some company that wants to build a blockchain platform, I don't necessarily know how to distribute securities well. I may need help. I may need, say, Goldman Sachs to help me distribute my securities. Well, if Goldman Sachs acts on my behalf as my agent, I'm an issuer, I'm trying to distribute securities. If Goldman Sachs is helping me distribute them, okay, either by buying them and reselling them or by finding buyers or whatever, that's an underwriter. Okay? Issuer, distribution, investor. If I go through someone else, that's an underwriter. All right? Now, when that investor decides to sell to another investor, whether it's over the counter or on an exchange, that's what's referred to as trading. When you see the word trading, that means secondary sales, not initial distributions. Right? So when you read the regulations or the law or anything, trading means what happens later, usually on an exchange or over the counter or some other methods. Okay, so the Securities Act, remember there's the Securities Act and the Securities Exchange Act. The Securities Act covers the initial or primary distribution of securities, not trading later, not what happens on the exchange. All right. Now, Section 2A is like the mother lode of definitions because it's amazing how many security attorneys and everyone else doesn't read the actual text of the act. And it can be overwhelming because it's like, it's gray and white and it's a lot of words. But if you want to understand specifically how things work, looking up these definitions is fantastic. All right, so 2A is a great resource. And actually, if you email me for the deck, I'll provide you links to the 33 Act and the 34 Act. So you can have all the text. It's important to note that there's many terms defined in the Securities Act. they're defined in ways that are not obvious. It's not normal English usage of some of these words. Okay, underwriter obviously is a defined term. Issuer is a defined term. Security is a defined term, and we'll get into it. Some of them have obvious meanings. Some of them have non-obvious meanings. And some definitions are very much broader than you would expect, and some definitions overlap with other definitions. So these things interact with each other. There's a similar section in the Securities Exchange Act, that's Section 3A, and they have some additional definitions beyond what's in the Securities Act. Okay, Section 2A1, the favorite, the one that's causing a world of pain for everyone, is what the heck is a security? Okay, we're going to come back to this, all right, because this is a big one. Okay, what's a person? Are you a person? You want to go to jail in Ukraine. You're not sure if you're really a citizen. This is like a Soviet distinction between a citizen and a person. You are a citizen. No, you're a person, but you are not a citizen. Are you a comrade? Zavarich? Okay. I meant that limit in my Russian. Okay, so person is not just an individual. It can be a company, a partnership, an association, a trust, yada, yada, yada. Just a person is any entity, whether individual, corporate, or other, right? A sale or sell, or to have a sale or to sell, should include every contract, a sale, or distribution of a security. Okay. The term offer should include every attempt or offer to dispose of a security for value. Okay, I'm not quoting the whole thing because it's just too much. But sale is a key word that's used all the time. Offer is just an attempt to offer. It's kind of interesting. It's a pretty broad definition. For value. Okay, so that's interesting. There's a concept of an airdrop in tokens. Right? If I just distribute my tokens to the world and I don't want anything back, am I selling them? Am I selling them under this definition? Say again? Yeah. Why? Well, if I'm distributing them to people and I'm not asking for anything back, in other words, I'm not doing anything for value. In other words, I'm not asking for something in return. If I'm doing an airdrop of tokens, suppose they're security tokens, suppose. Okay, but I'm not asking for anything back. Am I really selling or offering for sale these tokens?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, so under the plain, you get this all the time. There's the act, and then there's a way that people actually interpret it and what the courts do. I think under a plain reading of the language, you're not selling and you're not offering for sale. If I give you a gift of a piece of pie, I'm not selling you that pie. Okay? If I give you that pie and I want $1 back, I'm selling you that pie. Okay, that's plain normal English. Airdrops kind of try to do judo or bypass this issue by distributing tokens or distributing securities without asking for anything back. Now, what some courts have done is they tied themselves into a pretzel, and they said, well, the person's providing value by using your token because it's building up the value of your platform when they use it. Well, I guess that's true, but that's also expanding the definition of value so much that it doesn't even mean anything because I don't even know what not value would mean then. Okay, so there's a dispute right now, but under the plain reading of the language, there's some kind of return. There's kind of like a two-way transaction that's involved here. All right, let's keep going here. Okay, issuer. The term issuer means every person, remember person, defined term, who issues or proposes to issue any security. I propose to issue a security today. Oh, wait, I'm an issuer now. Never mind they don't actually do it. Okay, if I propose to do it. I propose to go for a walk. Well, I guess I burn off 100 calories even if I don't walk. It's kind of an interesting little thing. So anyone who issues securities or proposes to issue a security is an issuer. Okay, this is worth blasting through, but whenever you read the SEC literature, they're the commission. Like, we are the commission. There's no other commission. Okay? Commission, you notice, is uppercase because they're very, very, very important. Okay, most other defined terms are lowercase. All right? So the term commission means the SEC. Territory, which they decided to make uppercase also, I don't know why. It's not just the States, it's Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Isn't that nice? Okay, and the term interstate commerce, if you go to the very, 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 see if I can get there quickly. Of course, I went too far. Let's see here. Okay. A fair disclosure of the character security sold in interstate commerce and foreign commerce or through the mails. Well, why? Because under the US Constitution, theoretically, the federal government does not have the right to regulate what happens within a state. These are almost like independent countries. Okay? Theoretically, the US federal government can only regulate those things that are interstate, between the states, or between the states and a foreign country. Okay, and now the US federal government basically regulates everything because everything is interstate commerce. I mean, if you go on the internet, it's going to touch another state. But back in 1933, 34, when they were trying to get these laws passed, there was an actual attempt to keep the states somewhat independent and let them regulate what's going on within their own borders. Okay? So when the Congress passed this law, they're like, we're not regulating what happens within a state. No, we're only regulating what happens between the states and with interstate and with foreign commerce. So they even came up with a definition for interstate commerce. Okay, it's any sale between the states and a foreign country. That's interesting. Is that really interstate commerce? I guess it is. And with the District of Columbia. Okay, underwriter. Remember, issuer, investor, someone who stands in the middle is the underwriter. Okay, it means any person who has purchased from the issuer with a view to selling those securities as part of a distribution. Notice that key term, distribution. So if I am buying stock from an issuer because I want it to go up in value, because I want it to increase its value as an investment, I'm not an underwriter. Okay? If I'm buying stock from an issuer because it's part of a scheme of distribution where I'm going to turn around and resell that stock because I'm helping that issuer do that sale, like Goldman Sachs, then I'm an underwriter. Okay? Well, last part's interesting. Sure.
Am I also an underwriter in this in the ICO way? I mean, if I buy, I don't know, for 100,000 and then I sell them later?
So are you acting in tandem with the issuer? Is there an arrangement that's either explicit or implicit? Okay, so if suppose there's fraud chain, okay, and fraud chain has a deal with you where you're going to buy 1 million fraud tokens at a penny each, and you're going to resell them a week later at 10 pennies each, and that's your markup, and you're working together on that, you're an underwriter. Okay, if fraud chain is offering its fraud token at 1 penny, and you happen to buy it, and you immediately turn around and resell it, you're not an underwriter. You're just flipping the tokens. So there's some kind of scheme. There's some sort of arrangement that makes you an underwriter.
I mean, I'm asking in the special case of these advisors and all that stuff that actually conclude a contract. I mean, of course, this is now a special question, what is written in the contract. But in some extent, I'm negotiating with them to help them or to do whatever, right? Therefore, I can get, or because I'm a big investor and I put 100 million onto the table, that's why...
It's a good question. So there's two things. So underwriter is one of these broad, crazy definitions that can cover the whole world theoretically. There's really two core ideas behind it. It's either I'm taking either I'm taking possession of or taking responsibility for a certain allotment of securities on behalf of the issuer and either reselling them or making sure that they go where they should go. That's one version. Another version is if I'm somehow assisting or helping out plan the distribution. Like I don't do the direct sale, but I kind of work on the market and tell the issuer what to do. That kind of edges up on underwriter also. Now to take your advisor example, most of the time advisors to these ICO projects, they're not being given tokens for the purpose of helping the token issuer resell by reselling the advisor's own tokens. The advisor's taking those tokens because the advisor wants to get them for nothing and sell them for more. Okay, they just want to profit. Their goal isn't to distribute those tokens. But when they have other services that they're providing, so that they're really helping or supporting that distribution, you're kind of bumping up against the underwriter role. Now, I think you're still mostly safe, but you're getting into the gray zone. Okay, who's heard the term broker-dealer? Who hasn't heard it? Who's not going to raise their hand no matter what? Okay, cool. I'll just keep on. You, can you raise your hand, please? Okay, cool. All right. Everyone says broker-dealer like they're the same thing. They're not. Okay, I'll share something with you that 90% of people in the US who speak English as their first language don't understand the difference. Okay? A broker is someone who facilitates a transaction of something and gets a commission for doing it. They do not take ownership or possession of the thing. Okay? So a real estate broker doesn't buy a house from one person and resell it to another person. They connect the two people and takes commissions. Okay, that's a broker. A dealer is someone who buys the thing themselves, takes title, gives money, resells it, and they do not make the money from commission. They make the money on the markup. In other words, the difference between the buying price and the selling price. Okay, everyone says broker-dealer like it's the same thing. It's not, and most people don't even think it through. Broker never takes title, gets commission. Dealer takes title, makes money on the markup. In the 33 Act, dealer is defined, okay, but broker is not. Kind of interesting. Okay, in the 34 Act, broker is defined. So a term dealer means any person who engages for all or part of his time in the business of offering, buying, selling, or otherwise dealing or trading. Remember, trading is, it's aftermarket, right? In securities issued by another person, right? So they're not just an investor, okay? They're almost like a market maker. They're an active participant in the market who's always buying and always selling and always making money on the markup. Okay, you want to? Okay, I'll get to this stuff in a second here. All right. Who feels like that guy right there? Why do I even ask this question? Okay, everyone, if you don't feel like that guy, keep your hands down. Wow, see, that worked. Okay, cool. All right, so why is everyone scared of U.S. securities regulation? What's the big deal? Okay, I mean, it's a lot of words, but what's the problem? Well, the perceived problem is based on Section 5. Okay, this is the default rule of all securities law in the United States. Okay, it is unlawful to sell or offer to sell, and we know what these words mean now, or deliver securities unless there's something called a registration statement in effect with respect to such securities, and that requires SEC approval. And a prospectus has been provided to every buyer that meets the requirements of Section 10 of the Securities Act, and that also requires SEC approval. Now, we'll go into the definitions in a second, but oh my God. So it's saying every sale of securities in the United States requires that you register with the SEC, that you have something called a registration statement, which is a big form filled out, and this SEC approves it, and you prepare something called a prospectus, which is basically a sales document, and you give it to everyone, and the SEC approves it before you sell security. That sounds like freaking hell. I mean, do you really want to go to a government agency every single time you're going to sell security? And it's true, preparing, filing, amending, getting approval from the SEC for a registration statement and a prospectus is time-consuming and it's expensive. It's only really appropriate for a company that's looking to go public, for example, through an initial public offering, right? You don't want to do this. And also, if you actually did do this, you would not be what's known as a public company, meaning that you're always going to have to file these annual or quarterly reports with the SEC, you know, where if you say one little wrong thing, you're in trouble. I mean, it sounds like hell. 99.9% of the time, you're not Google, you're not Apple, you don't want to do an IPO, you don't want to file a registration statement, you don't want to file a prospectus. Okay, but this is what has everyone else freaked out. Oh my gosh, I don't really want to have to do all this stuff. How do I avoid it? Well, we'll get to that. All right, and here's Section 5 and all the gory detail. It basically says, I won't go through all this, it basically says you can't use interstate commerce or the mails to sell, offer for sale, or deliver a prospectus unless there's a registration statement in effect, unless you have an approved prospectus. That's a default rule. You really want to get out from that default rule. Definition of a registration statement, the fact you have to file it with the SEC, all the information that goes into it. This goes on and on and on and on. You know, here's a prospectus. It's not just a sales document. That's the normal English meaning. What a prospectus means under the Act is any written communication that's selling or offering for sale a security. So really anything can be a prospectus. I really do. So you know, you can't send anything out unless you register with the SEC. You have to put in all this information, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We're going to talk about how to escape from that, how you can raise unlimited amounts of money. How are we doing for time, by the way? What time is it? Jan?
7 p.m. 35.
Okay. Is blood sugar okay? Are we doing all right? Are you doing okay?
Yes.
Could you say that with a little bit more zest?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Just talk for an hour. You just talk for an hour.
You know, everyone stand up. Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. Okay, stretch, stretch, stretch. Roll your shoulders, roll your neck. You're all troopers, you're all learning good stuff. Okay. I'm probably not the guy to be leading this, but whatever.
Everyone is going to the toilet.
Jan!
Sorry.
Stand up, dude. Achtung bitte! Okay, there you go. Okay, good. All right. Breathe. Get oxygen in. Breathe in. Breathe out. Good, good, good. Hug your neighbor. Actually, don't do that. But okay, sit. Good, good. I'm proud of you all. You're doing well. Okay, great. Pavel in the house. You're brilliant. Okay, there you go. Okay. You know what the best way is to avoid registering your security? Don't be a security. Oh, yeah, that. Cool. Okay? There's many things on the planet that aren't securities. This water that I should be drinking, but I'm not, is not a security. Okay. Okay. So here's what we're going to cover. What's the definition of security under the Act? What's an investment contract? The Howey test. Okay? And we're going to talk about pencils. And I think you'll like this part. All right? This is really important for blockchain companies because if something's not a security, okay, and you sell in the United States, you don't need to register it with SEC. You don't need to find an exemption. You don't have to worry about Section 5. You just need to make sure you're not a security. Or if you are a security, you need to be aware of it and not hide. Okay, and I'm going to give you the tools to tell one way or another if you're a security. Okay, here's Section 2. Oh my God, that's a lot of words. Okay, but generally, security means all the obvious kind of things. Stocks, notes, bonds, debentures, all the things I mentioned, blah, 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 and investment contracts. Okay? So you have a definition of securities in the Securities Act. Okay, now, let's explore what this means. Okay, just recall that Securities Regulation deals with the offer and sale of securities, including fraudulent offers or sales of non-securities. If what you're selling is not a security, the SEC has nothing to say about it. Just like the SEC can't declare war, they can't regulate non-securities. Okay, they only have delegated authority to handle securities. Okay, and we saw in the prior slide that the definition of security boils down to a long list of traditional types: stock, bond, note, all the stuff we're used to. Remember, equity and debt, and also investment contracts. Okay, now, if I have some stock, okay, and it does represent an equity interest in a company, and I go, you know what? I don't want to register under Section 5. I'm going to call my stock a chair. I'm not selling stock anymore. I'm selling shares. Now, it's true. My shares have equity. They pay dividends. You can vote on the director, but it's not a stock. It's a share. Do you think that works? Do you think the SEC will be like, oh, you're right. You don't need to register that share under Section 5. It's okay. It's a share. It's not a stock. Our bad. What do you think?
Could you repeat and I will answer it.
Okay. If I have something that is in every way like a stock, it represents ownership in a company, it pays dividends, you can vote for the board of directors, and I want to sell it, but I don't want to register under Section 5. Suppose I take this stock and I call it a chair.
If it has all features of the stock, it is
Yes.
security.
Yep, that's right. Okay, so there's what's called the substance over form doctrine. Okay, you can give it whatever name you want. You can give it whatever form you want. The SEC and the courts are going to look at the economic and legal reality of what the thing is and decide whether or not it's a security. So if you have your share of stock and you call it a token, just by example, the SEC won't go, oh, you're right. I'm so sorry. It's a token. It's not stock. My bad. Please go on. No, they'll basically say nice try. All right, now, you notice that the term security includes investment contract. What the heck is that? That's super vague. All right, well, Congress, as dense as they were in 1933, they realized that they could not possibly come up with all the things that are equal securities in the future. People are creative. They come up with new things all the time, like, for example, tokens. All right? So the term investment contract is sort of a catch-all term to cover things that are securities but don't fit in within the traditional categories. Remember, someone's investing money or capital, taking part in enterprise risk because they want profits, but their investment is at risk as if the company does not do well. Okay, well, that's a security, basically. And an investment contract is a catch-all term for things that aren't a stock, aren't a bond, but are nonetheless a security. They put that in the 33 Act, but it wasn't until 1946 that the US Supreme Court came up with some kind of reasonable test of what an investment contract is. Okay, so you had 13 years there where everyone was like, investment contract, what the heck is that? All right? And the case involved the sale of citrus or orange orchards and maintenance contracts where people would make money from the sales of oranges that were in those fields and share in the profits. And the guy selling those interests did not register those sales under Section 5. And went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Okay, so here's the test. Here's how you tell whether or not your token is a security or not. Right? There's the Howey test. If all four of these things are true, then you have a security. You have an investment contract. If any one of them is not true, then you're not a security. Okay. There needs to be an investment of money or value. Right? If there's no investment or money or value, then you don't have a security. Does everyone get what this test is doing? It's deciding whether or not something is an investment contract. If it's an investment contract, it's a security. If it's a security, you have to do registration under Section 5 or find an exemption. If it's not a security, then fine, it's not. Okay? You have to, the investor has to be investing with an expectation of profit. Now, the actual case says led to an expectation of profit. Led to. Okay, that's key. Okay, if I put money into something and I don't expect profit, it's not a security. If I donate to a church, okay, I'm not expecting profit, even if I'm putting money in, right? There has to be some expectation of profit. And what's known as a common enterprise. In other words, I'm not just buying a toaster, right? I'm investing in something where there's some process, some platform, some enterprise at work that's looking to make a profit or increase the value of some asset. Okay? And the work that happens, the benefit that results, is primarily through the efforts of others. In other words, you don't have a security if everyone's actively contributing to something. You only have a security if you have a passive investor, a passive contributor, right? If someone's actively working on something, it's them that's creating the value. It's not the enterprise or the work of others. If all four of these things are true, then you have a security, you have an investment contract rather. If any one of these is not true, then you don't. Okay, now here's a little wrinkle. Suppose, here, what's your name?
My name?
Yeah.
Nikita.
Nikita, cool name. All right, Nikita. I'm going to give you another example. Suppose I really do have a chair. And I go, and it really is a chair, I'm not being cute. I go, Nikita, you should seriously buy this chair. It's going to go up in value. There's going to be an active market for this chair later. In fact, this chair, I heard somewhere, may pay dividends and let you vote at the chair of company board of directors meetings. Will you buy this chair for me? Now, separate from whether you would buy it or not, is that a security?
I suppose it to be because I expect dividends, I expect something from in return, and maybe because if we have, as your example, it has a speculative value for me.
Right, now, obviously it doesn't, it's a chair, but I communicated a certain thing, I led you to an expectation of profits. Okay, so tattoo this on your, good answer, tattoo this on your mind. Okay, if you market your non-security as a security, the SEC will believe you. Okay, case after case after case, when things are not clear whether something is a security or not, the courts and the SEC look to the understanding of the parties. They look to how something was marketed. So when all these ICOs take their not security token and talk about how it's going to go up in value and how it's going to end up on an exchange and how you should invest in it, what are they doing? They're marketing their not security as a security, and the SEC is believing them. Okay? So part of my job as a lawyer, oops, and part of your job as people who don't want to hire me for a criminal case, all right, is to make sure that when you market your token, you don't falsely describe it as a security and lead people to have an expectation of profits. Does that make sense? Okay. Sort of a securities Heisenberg effect. Yes.
Could you switch one slide back? Can you explain once more the fourth point?
Right. So if you and I are active partners in a business, okay, you're working and I'm working, right? It's my partnership interest isn't technically a security because I'm not passively relying on you. I haven't given up control to you. The enterprise risk doesn't lie with you. It lies with us. Okay, I have control over the enterprise risk. Right? So it's not truly an investment contract. It's more like a joint venture or collaboration. Right? The idea of an investment contract really means that you have passive investors. The idea is they don't have full, why? Because we're not really worried about people who are active in business. We don't need to protect them. We need to worry about people who are not active in the business, who are relying on other people to generate the results and don't have access to all the information. So in your traditional limited partnership company, we have general partners and limited partners. The general partnership interest is not a security, but the limited partnership interest is a security.
I would say the following way: if I make it happen with my protocol and whatever, then I actually force those that bought my tokens need to participate. That the ship is going on. Then
I didn't quite understand that.
voting, for instance.
Right.
Yeah, so
Well, voting is kind of interesting because voting by itself is not active management, but it shades into not being a security. There's voting and then there's control, and it's not quite the same thing. And if you have 1 in a million vote, that's not active management, but if you 1 in 3 vote, you might.
pardon me?
Maybe I didn't understand the question. Just say it again.
No, the question you understood correctly. My idea was projects that give away all the tokens and not only 30% or 50%, and that they implement, like for instance, Zencash or Cardano, some kind of voting and some kind of treasury, where you as the community who bought the tokens should vote and should act.
I got it.
Goes on, then my question is the fourth point valid or not?
Right. Okay, I got it. So what Ethereum, what EOS, what Cardano, what all these guys are doing when they set up these foundations or when they separate the foundation from the platform, right, is they're trying to make it so that even though they're the ones who put out the tokens, they're not the ones adding value. It's the block producers or developers or someone else. It's the community adding value. Right? So what a lot of these people, they don't just set up foundations to be nice. They're setting up foundations so that they can separate the work that's being done to make the token go up in value from their ownership of the token. Let me explore more later, but it's right. They're purposely trying to fracture or break up these elements so they don't all reside in one place. So they're not an investment security. And then I think I saw a question or comment. Right. Right. It's a good question. It's not clear yet. It's not clear yet. I would also argue that if you have many, many people who are not coordinated, adding value and doing their own thing, where you really end up is on the common enterprise prong. Okay? A functioning market or functioning community is not a common enterprise. Common enterprise is a more compact relationship, like a company or a group of companies working together, or a group of individuals intentionally coordinating, right? So if you have 100 people acting in their own self-interest, but when that self-interest results to the platform improving, you don't really have a common enterprise in the way it's meant there. Does that make sense? Or again? Well, so it's starting centralized and heading to decentralized? Is that the idea? I mean, that's common. If I'm understanding you correctly. Okay, so. All right, so in the beginning, I mean, you're asking the right question because it's what everyone's dealing with all the time. Like Bitcoin is nice because it's as decentralized as anything I know out there, even if you want to call it Chinese Bitcoin. You don't have a center. You don't have a common enterprise. You have a whole bunch of people acting in their own self-interest, and the system is distributed. It is decentralized now. It was almost from the beginning. there's a lot of blockchain and crypto startups that start centralized and they say they're going to go to decentralized. Okay, that's their plan once they develop to a certain point. Or they start proprietary and they say they're going to go to open source. Okay, now why are they saying that? Okay, what they're trying to say is, look, we don't have a common enterprise. Please don't bite us. SEC, please don't bite me. Okay, because we're going this direction. We're just kind of loading up until then right now. Well, that doesn't make it necessarily a security, but at least at that moment when they're centralized, there is a good argument that they have a common enterprise. Once they start peeling off layers of functionality, you got your block producers, you have developers, you have no one in charge anymore, then they can begin to argue that they don't have a common enterprise. What people are trying to do with these nonprofit foundations and Zug and everywhere else is they're trying to say, the point I made before about number 4, but they're also trying to say, okay, maybe we have a common enterprise, but at the center of that common enterprise, we don't have a for-profit business, we have a nice little nonprofit, and we're all little angels. So, it's not an investment, it's not a security, right? And that may work. That may work. We don't know yet. Now, just keep in mind, like we don't know yet, but as more time passes, it's better because it's kind of unfair. It's one thing when something goes bad. At first when the stuff started, the SEC and no one else knew what was going on. Okay, well, these people kind of got away with it, with the DAO and everything else, right? Then, the SEC woke up, and I think on July 24th, 2017, they said to the world, they did their famous DAO report. People are familiar with the DAO? I imagine in this crowd? Okay. And they said, look, the DAO was a security, okay, but we're not going to do anything about it. But we're letting you know that we're aware of tokens, we're aware of blockchains, and if the DAO, people were voting on investment projects, and I think we're going to share in the results. Not only was that a security, that was an investment company under the Investment Company Act of 1940. So the SEC just used them as an example. Now here's the question: why isn't Bitcoin's pretty clear? Satoshi developed the technology, and then he disappeared. Right? Maybe he disappeared because he knew the SEC would say there was a common enterprise if he stuck around. Maybe he's laughing. Seriously. All right? Maybe the reason he went away was to avoid a common enterprise. All right? But very quickly, Bitcoin became decentralized and distributed. Well, Ethereum's a little bit different. Okay? Vitalik goes, hey, I have this idea. Okay, send me your Bitcoin. Okay? I will give you Ethereum that won't be worth anything now. Okay, I'm going to build up the Ethereum virtual machine and start making it do something, and then your tokens will go up. He didn't say your tokens will go up in value as a result, but the tokens will be functional as opposed to non-functional. They would obviously go up in value. Remember the situation with the SAFT? How was Ethereum not a security in the beginning? Okay, I'd argue it was, but when the SEC came out with the DAO report, they talked about the DAO, but not Ethereum. What the heck? All right, well, to your point, maybe it's because Ethereum, rather than Vitalik going off with Satoshi to Mars, decided I'm going to go off to Zug, Switzerland and form a nonprofit foundation. Maybe. All right, so the law is not clear, but you can kind of manipulate these factors. There's an expression I use, which is you want to be, just keep this in mind, you want to be the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty shirt line. You want to be the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty shirt line. Okay? Because if you're in a room where no one is clean, you just want to be the cleanest of the dirty people, okay? Because if you want to play in this field, okay? And you can't help it, okay? Because the law is not clear and the SEC is not doing a good job of making it clear, all right? So when you make a nonprofit and you distribute and decentralize, you're you're cleaning your shirt, okay? All right, yes? Okay, you had the Gordon Securities Test, by the way, which is adopted by Malta. Yeah. Actually, I gave a presentation to Malta, and I said, if this is true, this is a test for something not being a security. And I read off my factors. And then the main regulator in Malta stood up and goes, how do you know this? We just passed this. We're proposing this law tomorrow. I was like, oh, cool. I can say it's a Malta. We call it the Gordon Act. He said, sure. So there you go. Okay. Okay. Here, but this is my personal position. We have the Howey test about what makes a security. Well, here's the Gordon test about what makes something not a security. Right? What do you get when you buy a security? Well, you're going to have one of these 4 things at least. Okay, some kind of claim on the underlying enterprise. You're either going to have a claim on its profits, meaning its dividends. You're going to have a claim on its cash flows, in other words, interest payments. or you can have a claim on its assets. Okay, for example, if the company breaks up or it gets sold, or you can have a claim on governing this enterprise. If you don't have a claim on profits, and you don't have a claim on cash flows, and you don't have a claim on assets, and you don't have a claim on governance, I mean, in real life, how in God's name are you a security? Right? How can you argue you're a security if you have none of those things? No profits, no cash flows, no assets, no governance. I mean, at the end of the day, you're just, at most, maybe a software license, right? So in the absence of all these, I find it very unlikely you're a security, okay? You know how many courts have proven this correct? Absolutely none, okay? So take your chances, okay? But just logically, this seems to be correct.
Can you say once more, why is the claim on governance a part of the security?
Well, okay, so you're picking on an interesting one. I think it's, let me take the first three. It's reasonably clear that if you're getting paid dividends, it's a security. It's reasonably clear that if you're getting interest payments or share profits, I mean, it says profit sharing, and the definition is security. If you have a claim on assets, not the toaster you bought, but the toaster company's manufacturing equipment, it's kind of clear, you're kind of in an edge zone, but you're probably a security. Governance is tricky, okay? Because governance is traditionally, like I mentioned, associated with equity, the ability to elect directors, who elect officers or appoint officers, and manage the company. But by itself, if you don't get any benefit from governance, it's kind of hard to argue you're security. But if you add governance to any of the prior three, you have a very strong case you're security. Now, it's too much to explain in a slide, and I don't want to skip over it, but you picked on something that's right. Okay, governance by itself, without any benefit, without the ability to send, if I can govern IBM, but I can't send any of the profits my direction, what good does it do me? I don't know. But when you combine that with the profits or dividends, you get some power. Okay? All right, I think I'm not going to go through this whole deck tonight, but I think I'm going to wrap up on this one. Does anyone have a pencil? Pen? No. Is this a security? Actually, we're going to find this out. Okay, here's a case study. Can we all agree that this is a virtual pencil? Raise your hand if you're going to argue with the fact that this is a pencil. See, I know how to manage this crowd. Okay, this by itself is not a security, okay? Let's face reality. This is a pencil. Pen. Do you agree?
Yes.
Where's that Ukrainian sense of humor I've heard about? Okay, it is not pencil, silly American. Okay, now, if I market this as a pencil, this pencil writes really well. It draws. It does not erase. Is it still a pencil, or is it a security? I don't know. I want to go to Ukrainian jail. I'm a person, not a citizen. Good lawyer answer. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if I market this pencil as a pencil, it's not a security. I mean, the answer is right there. What if I market this security as a pencil, just like I marketed that chair as a security? I said that totally wrong. What if I market this pencil? Maybe I didn't say it wrong. I'm tired. What if I market this pencil as a security, or I market that chair as a security? Okay. Now, remember, led to expectation of profits. It's probably a security, but is it also securities fraud? Nikita. Good job. Yes. Yep. Okay, now let's go back to the beginning. I have a pencil. I tokenize this pencil. Okay, I'm tokenizing an asset. Does it sound familiar? It happens all the time in Ukraine. All right, I'm tokenizing this pencil. Does that turn it into a security? Probably. Why? Okay, so let me hit this one. And a lot of people think this, and actually several wise people think this, but I want you to consider this. Okay. Just because an asset is based on another asset, that does not automatically make it a security. Okay, so for example, derivatives, okay, are often not securities. All right, when you have carbon futures, okay, they're based on carbon, the amount of carbon out there, all that other stuff. That does not make them automatically a security. They're actually commodities, okay, or they can be other things. All right, the basic idea is if the underlying asset or object is not a security, then merely by tokenizing it, the token won't itself be a security. If you have an underlying asset that is a security, for example, a stock or bond or note, and you tokenize that stock, bond, or note, it is a security. Right? In other words, the tokenization of the thing, the token itself, unless you add new information, unless you add new facts, just the mere act of tokenizing it does not turn it into a security. You're just making a software representation of it. Okay, and you're making it maybe more tradable, more easy to manipulate. Now, there's a reason why this confusion is out there, right? Because everyone's heard all these cases where oranges can be securities, or interest in condominiums can be securities, or beaver pelts can be securities, or whiskey can be securities. There's a case out there about, whiskey is a security. Okay, if you read the actual case, which almost no securities lawyer in the US does, none of that is true. It's always some underlying asset, whether it's an orange or whiskey or a badger pelt, combined with some additional economic interest, like a percentage in the badger pelt company's factory, that turns that sort of compound object into a security. Okay? If you go back to Howey, and I know I sort of went through the facts of the case pretty quickly. If you go back to Howey, this guy wasn't actually selling orange groves or orange orchards. He was selling plots of land with oranges where they would harvest the oranges and then sell them for profit and then share the profits. So every security attorney, when they try to sound clever, goes, oranges under Howey were treated like a security. No, they weren't. You're just trying to scare people. Okay? What actually happened was orange trees plus an economic or contractual relationship got turned into a security. Why? Because people were buying that cluster of things with an expectation of profit. Okay? If I buy whiskey, and I hope I will soon, okay, that's not a security. If I buy whiskey, if I buy the right to receive whiskey in the future and trade it on a market, and the whiskey will pay me like Scotch dividends, then I have a security. Okay, it's a compound object. Go ahead. Right, but that's true, but that's a different thing. It's a fantastic point. It's version 2 of what I was saying. So let me take it down in a certain way. You're right. When you're buying tokens at that point, it's almost like there's two tokens. There's the token of the future, and then there's the token of now. And yes, it's true that the token of the now is going to turn into the token of the future, but they're really two separate things. The token of the future is a usable token on that platform that will actually let you access some service or some benefit. But the token of now is not what's going to happen there. It's your hope that it's going to happen. Right? So the token of now that you're buying is not functional. You're hoping it's going to get functional, and you're giving money to a company. That's actually a good topic for an article. Okay? The token of now versus token of the future. So the token of now that you're buying is an investment because it's speculative. You don't know if it's going to work. You're giving them money to build it. What messes with people's brains is there's a slow evolution from the token of now to the token of future, so that at some point in the future it's usable enough and has enough utility that's no longer security. But it's not a bright line. It's a spectrum. It's a series of gradations over time. But I'd argue even in that case, the token itself is the thing that you're buying. It just has different characteristics. It's not, maybe abstractly it's representing a bunch of services, but it's not representing an asset with its own distinct legal identity. Okay, so if you're selling a garden with oranges, that has its own legal identity, and then if you put a token to it, you're referencing that legal identity. Okay, when you have a token on a utility platform, I wouldn't say that those services have their own legal identity. It's just something that you get when you use that software platform. We can go on this for hours. I can feel it. But, let me keep going. I'm happy to come back to it. Let me just keep going just so we can. All right. So basically, if you tokenize something and that thing is not a security, the mere act of tokenizing it does not turn it into a security unless, of course, you market it, that token as a security, which every freaking ICO is doing. That's why they got busted. Okay, now, what if I tokenize this pencil and I make those tokens exchangeable? Okay, not only do I tokenize them, but now there's an active exchange for those tokens. I turn that thing into security. Well, logically, the answer should be no. Things get exchanged all the time, and they're not investments. Gasoline gets exchanged. Currency gets exchanged. Okay, shoes get exchanged, I don't know, on eBay. Okay, the mere act of exchanging does not turn something into a security. Okay? But when you start talking about something being listed on exchange sometime in the near future, which a lot of ICOs try to do, what are they really saying? They're kind of going down the direction of leading someone to expect profits. Why? Because the token that they bought not only will go up in value, they'll be able to sell it for more value because it'll be on an exchange. That's why you have to be careful about talking about listing things on exchange. Logically, it shouldn't affect whether or not something's a security. But when you have someone who's aggressive, a regulator, they can say, look, we know what you're really doing. What you're really doing is saying that the profits that these people want, they'll be able to get them once it gets listed on Binance or something. For $6 million. Yep. Okay, now, if I add a pencil plus a pencil enterprise interest, remember, dividends, cash flow, assets, or governance, then I have a security. Okay? I'm not selling the pencil anymore. I'm selling the pencil bundled with some right associated with the pencil company. Make sense? Keep your hand down if it doesn't make sense. Okay. Try to figure. All right. Now here's my favorite example. Okay. Suppose there's initial public offering, right? Now suppose I do an initial pencil offering. That sounds great, right? I'm going to do a offering of these pencils to the public on a mass basis, right? Either the pencils or tokenized pencils. Do I now have a security? Now, let me get an answer from the group. Someone.
In terms of marketing, yes.
Right, okay, that's a good answer. Good job. All right, so it's tricky, and here's why it's tricky. All right, simply selling pencils, if I sell millions of pencils to the public and I don't call it an IPO, if I don't call it an initial pencil offering, I'm just selling millions of pencils. It's not a big deal. Okay, what happens when I call it an IPO, an initial pencil offering? Okay, what does that sound like? It sounds like initial public offering. Okay, what am I doing? Okay, on one level, I'm being witty. On the other level, I'm bringing forth association in someone's mind that this is like a security. Hey, get it? It's an IPO like an IPO. Remember, IPOs are initial public offerings, securities, profit, all that other stuff. Okay, I'm marketing this thing as if it's a security. Now, I may be being cute, haha, initial pencil offering. Okay, but all I need is some idiot who's like, oh, I thought you meant initial pencil public offering. I thought I could make money. And all of a sudden, the SEC, who wants to protect investors, steps in there. Now, take ICOs, initial coin offering. What does initial coin offering sound like? It sounds like initial public offering. Okay, ICO sounds cool. Okay, part of the reason I went back to do this is because ICO sounds freaking cool. I love the term ICO. Right, and from someone who's behind this technology and behind what's being accomplished, I think it's great. But there's no doubt that using the term ICO is evocative of the idea of an IPO, and is an evocative idea of a security, and is evocative of the idea that you're going to buy the token for this, and you're going to sell for this, and you're going to make money. So, that's where you get the stupid term token generation event. Okay, how stupid does that sound? Token generation event. It doesn't sound like anything, right? Now, why do people say that? Okay, they say it because their lawyer told them not to use the term ICO because it sounds like initial public offering. Okay, that's what's going on. Right? So, why would we tie ourselves in a pretzel over this? Excuse me. It's because that expectation of profit thing, it's led to an expectation of profit. All right? Unfortunately, the way the world works is if I market that share like a security, the SEC will believe me. If I market that token like a security, the SEC is going to believe me. If I sell it in an ICO that sounds like an initial public offering, the SEC will believe me. Okay? This is the reality we got to work with. So even though I love the term ICO, I tell clients, oh my God, call it a token generation event, fine. Okay? And we just kind of deal with it. Here's your summary. I think, okay, look, I'm not in your seats, okay? So you just give me feedback. Is it a pause point? Is it a keep going point? Is it a stretch point? Is it a whiskey point?
Whiskey point.
Okay, great. You guys are troopers. I know it's complex, but you're an engaged audience. I appreciate it. We'll continue, hopefully. The next part is where I show you how to get the money, exemptions from registration, okay, with Reg D. So tomorrow is the money. Money, money, money. Woo! All right. Everyone, good job. Thank you. I appreciate it.